This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and host NYSE Euronext, along with Governance Knowledge Partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and once again, as you can tell by our backdrop here, we are filming remotely from the West Coast Boardroom Summit here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And our topic for this session is going to be dealing with serving as a committee chair. And there is nobody that is going to be a better representative for this topic than Stephen West, who is a board member with Cisco Systems and is the audit chair for Cisco, and also on the board of Autodesk and is the comp chair for Autodesk. Now, I have to tell you, Steve, that normally sort of somebody would put this in the category of glutton for punishment, because the audit chair, certainly in the old days, was the thing that got all the focus and attention. And you've not only kept that, but now you've accepted the position of being the comp chair, which is clearly in the bright light of everybody's arrows. Talk to me a little bit about taking on both roles.
I've been accused of being a glutton for punishment, but one of the things that really interests me is trying to look at all the different roles that a board member can have, and obviously these are with two different companies. So when the opportunity came up at Autodesk to become the comp chair, I thought, well, this would be a good opportunity to learn something of that part of being a director that I had not really experienced from being an audit chair. So I found it to be very interesting and a challenge, probably more than I thought it was going to be. But I definitely have an appreciation now for the comp chair role when I sit on the audit side and vice versa. So, I think from a standpoint as a board director and providing value for the shareholders, being able to move around and not say, well, I'm a director and I serve on 3 different audit committees. I'm working to try the different areas and understand all those roles and how they're interrelated.
And you would hope in the end that a director would not be focused. I mean, ultimately, these things aren't just the committee's responsibility, there's the board's responsibility. So if you don't have somebody that's well schooled in all facets of serving as a board member, that probably doesn't help on the full board.
I think so. I think it's good for you to move around through the committees and try that. I would say with audit, because it tends to be so specialized, if you go on to another board and you were in audit, they say, oh, we've got somebody who can be in audit, which I was lucky enough to have the opportunity where they said, would you like to do something different? And I said, sure, I would really like to do that.
Well, and again, I'm not being necessarily a proponent that everybody should be chair of both of those at the same time, no less, but the point is, I think we both agree that you have to have a broader base than just one committee base.
And I have to be candid enough to say that I was on the audit committee, or on the comp committee, not as chair for a while, so I had some good schooling before I took over.
Share with me, I think it would be interesting from the audience's perspective on the skill sets that you think are necessary for each, because they are very different. You have to be the financial expert, or you might be the financial expert relative to being the board chair, and then you swing all the way to, the audit chair, and then you swing all the way to the comp, a whole different set of analysis, to make sure that you're doing what's right on that side. Talk a little bit about what skill sets might be different in those two.
Well, the one thing that I found that works well across both, first of all, is to be willing to adapt to change. There's so much change going on in the marketplace and in the role for a chair in either one of these, that you really need to be able to adapt to that change and accept it. And another part of that is bringing in some good experts that you can work with. And I would, going from audit, you tend to be a little bit more by the numbers, where on the comp side, you tend to be a little bit more, it's about the qualitative aspects of, are we really doing what we say we do? Sure, we can create a comp plan that says, for example, we're going to look at what revenue growth we have. But then there's also the qualitative side that you have to deal with, and things like CEO succession and so on, that there's not necessarily the rigor that you would find when you're evaluating financial performance on the audit companies or audit committee side.
Really when we look at this year, it really was a fairly smooth year for, say, on pay. But as head of the comp committee, have you found it that while it may have been a smooth year, there was a lot of consternation in making sure that you had it right and got the vote?
Yeah, I think there was. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about how to do that. I mean, we want to create value for our shareholders and have the right, compensation plan to maintain the employees that we have. So trying to balance all that and then getting that out in the CD&A is important. It's something that is going to be an evolutionary process, and we're going to have to reach out to our, shareholders and make sure they understand what we're doing and why we're doing that. And it's going to continue to evolve. So we're kind of looking forward to this year, but hoping that we do a good job again. So
well, you certainly can't take it for granted, because there are going to be new scrutiny, and people feel more experienced about giving that scrutiny. So anybody that's sitting on their laurels unfortunately might be in for a surprise.
Yeah, I think it's really important to get that outside opinion, and rely on some folks that are outside firms that can come in and put the scrutiny on what you think is a good job and give you some feedback on that. You can't just go it on your own.
Well, one of the great things about having you here is it lets me get into an area that I've always wanted to ask, because I consider you a Silicon Valley kind of guy with the boards that you serve on. And one of the things that was interesting is we saw the .com boom, and then bust. And when I was interacting with the board members and the CEOs during the .com boom, there was this impression that the paradigm was different for .com companies as far as governance went, as far as board structure and what you did. Obviously, there was some difference in how they viewed companies as well. I always wondered, at the time whether that was correct. Well, then the bust part of it came, and we saw that, at least from a company structure point of view, there had to be sort of more of a foundation there, and I think it was a little bit true on, maybe even a little bit in board structure on that. So here we are, X number of years later, we're seeing the emergence of the social media, and the other tech-related things that are happening, when we look at different companies that are making nice surges, in devices and things like that. Do you see any difference, in the attitude? Do you see any difference in the structure? Are people playing it, closer to the traditional vest maybe this time around from what they learned? What's your sort of take on that?
Well, my take is I think there's a lot more focus on the fundamentals. And, back in the .com era, it was, what do we need to do? And we're really focused on, driving up stock price. I mean, there were, obviously we all know that now, there are companies that didn't have any revenue, but they had, enormous stock prices. So today, when you see, and I talk to fellow board members, they're focused much more on the basics and what I would consider to be the important things. Do we have a strategy? Is it a realistic strategy? Can we execute against that strategy? Right leadership team to make that execution happen? And then, at the end of the day, do we have the right metrics to evaluate how well we're doing, and are we really driving true shareholder value? And certainly all of the governance things that have happened since that time have put much more emphasis on that. But for me, that's the major difference, is we are getting back to focusing on, what it takes to really build a great company.
Well, whenever I get the chance of having a true director sitting in this chair across from me, there's a question that I always like to pose to them, sort of close with. And the first is, okay, we've been through a rough period of time, starting in 2008 and through. No company has gone unaffected in that period of time. that put tests on governance, put tests on a lot of things. We have more transparency now. We have new regulations, and a lot of things have happened. When you collectively look at all your past experiences with there and then look at going forward, what sort of concerns you about boardroom trends, okay? And then sort of what equally encourages you about boardroom trends?
Fair enough. I think the one thing that if I look at the macro level is the regulatory environment, and not to say that we shouldn't have the regulations, but the notion that we have regulations that are going to have unintended consequences, and we just don't know what's going to happen. It looks good on paper. Now we're in a lot of the execution of that. What's going to be the impact? And I have a lot of concern about that and how we manage through that. On the plus side, I come to an event like this event here, and I see the number of directors here who are really engaged and who really want to do a good job, and I think that's fabulous, because that just shows that people want to do the right thing, they want to learn more, be much more engaged in being a director and focusing with their shareholders. I think that's fabulous.
You had a chance to sit in on the peer exchanges yesterday, which takes committee chairs and puts them together. You found that useful?
I found it very useful. Yeah. I took several pages of notes to go back and do some work on my committees.
Well, Stephen, that's all good points, all something that we need to keep in good perspective. And if this cheering in the background lets people know how enthusiastic the directors are, then we're going to have a lot of people here next year, because there's been a lot of cheering on that side. So we appreciate that, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope that you'll join us next week when we'll take another look at a key topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and host NYSE Euronext, along with Governance Knowledge Partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.